2000s, MTV would air a new Spider-Man animated show called Spider-Man: The New Animated Series. Now, the hype surrounding this show at the time was kinda strange, as for most, this was just your typical Spider-Man cartoon, detailing Peter's life as Spider-Man through college. However, what made this series stand out was its apparent connection to Sam Raimi's first Spider-Man film, detailing the events that supposedly took place between the first and second movie. There was even a tie-in comic in development, written by Brian Michael Bendis and drawn by Terry Dodson, and we even have evidence on what the art style of the comic may have looked like. Despite this apparent connection, as you'll see, the MTV series does create a lot of plot points that would be directly contradicted by the release of Spider-Man 2. The story of Spider-Man: The New Animated Series should be set sometime shortly after the events of the first movie, and there are some things that the story quickly establishes that make sense towards the continuity. First of all, Peter is still attending university and he still maintains a job at the Daily Bugle. However, the show also makes some tweaks to the continuity. First of all, MJ, Harry, and Peter go to the same school, a weird choice considering that it was never established that the three characters went to the same school in Spider-Man 1, 2, and 3. Spider-Man in the show also faces off against many fantastical villains and other classic Spider-Man characters. Strange, considering that in Spider-Man 2, none of these adventures are ever directly mentioned or even hinted at. In fact, it's pretty clear that Dr. Octopus is the second major villain Peter ever encountered. There are even more strange details worth mentioning, like the fact that Peter had a different girlfriend in the show that's never once mentioned in the movies. Peter's characterization and personality is also pretty different in the MTV show compared to the movie. Peter in the show is notably taller and more handsome than Tobey Maguire, but his personality is also different, being quippier and charismatic compared to Tobey, whose Peter was awkward, soft-spoken, and dweeby, so it's quite hard to imagine that these two Peters are the same. Spider-Man-wise, they are closer to each other, with both being pretty quippy, the only difference being the suits. While the MTV Spider-Man does have the silver webbing, his lenses look completely different, but since visually the MTV show is completely different from the movies, this does get a pass. In the MTV Spider-Man show, Mary Jane is very much pursuing her acting career aggressively. She even seeks support from Harry and Peter regarding her progress towards her dream. However, her aspirations is about the only accurate part of the character. In fact, it's her relationship with Peter that makes you question the canonicity. You see, MJ in the MTV series is much more flirty with Peter than we're used to. She has a much more aggressive attitude when it comes to making her love clear to him, to a degree we never saw in the Raimi movies.
You can't run away from me forever, Peter Parker.
She did make her love clear to him in that film as well. However, Peter outright rejects her love, so seeing her being so overt with her feelings in the show doesn't really make much sense. The show also does explore the idea of MJ and Harry getting back together, but this does not really go anywhere. By the release of Spider-Man 2, Peter and MJ's relationship resets, and there's no indication of anything they went through in the MTV show. In fact, all the development they experienced in the show is basically repeated once again, so we know for sure that their development in the series never took place. Harry is still very close friends with Peter, and it's to the point where Peter still lives with him in his apartment, sharing rent every month. Of course, his appearance is completely different from the movies, but his characterization is what really matters in this case. In the show, Harry actually has a grudge against Spider-Man, as we're told that Spider-Man killed his father prior to the show's first episode. Norman would get killed at the end of the first Spider-Man film. And in the show, Harry's grudge against Spider-Man is a pretty major part of his character, to the point where he's very upset at Peter for continuing to take pictures of him.
And you can stop glorifying that murdering freak boy Spider-Man.
This is an element of his character that would later return in Spider-Man 2.
Peter, don't you understand how I feel? I want this guy dead. The same way you want the guy who killed your Uncle Ben dead.
In the MTV series, Peter faces off against the Lizard in the episode Law of the Jungle. In this episode, Peter helps Kurt Connors with his formula that allows him to regenerate limbs. In the story, Kurt Connors, of course, turns into the lizard and goes on to attack Harry. Peter manages to stop him, but this event would be directly retconned in Spider-Man 2. In the film, Kurt Connors does appear. However, there's no reference or indication that he ever became the lizard. And there's no indication as well that him and Peter have a very close working relationship as established in the show. There's also the fact the lizard literally dies in the MTV series, but that's not really all that important.
Genus Aranii, at your service.
So in the last 2 episodes of the MTV series, Spider-Man faces off against 2 telepaths who use their powers to mess with his head, making him see things that never truly occurred. In one dark moment of the show, on the final episode, Peter strangles one of the villains and accidentally drops them off the edge of a building. However, as we find out, this wasn't one of the villains, but Peter's then girlfriend at the time, now in critical condition. What's worse is that the 2 telepaths are seemingly killed at the end of the episode. This makes Peter feel an immense sense of guilt. He begins to realize that he wasn't deserving of being a hero. In an act of guilt, Peter gives up on being Spider-Man for good and tosses his costume away in the river. This was a shocking ending to the MTV series. A bold and radical choice that many didn't see coming at the time. The only problem is that by Spider-Man 2 is somehow back to being Spider-Man, and there is no mention of the girl he literally almost killed. Even weirder is that the entire Spider-Man No More story is repeated once again, with Peter giving up on the mantle. This wouldn't be a problem if it weren't for the fact that Spider-Man 2 would take place a few months after the show, so there's no way Peter would quit twice within a span of a few months. It's better to classify the MTV Spider-Man as an alternate timeline of events following the first Spider-Man movie. However, as we've come to realize, connecting these 2 stories together is difficult, even if we don't factor in the events of Spider-Man 2.